She is a leader of the Boston branch of Students and Youth for New America. She has been involved in all kinds of progressive protests and demonstrations and has widely distributed leaflets challenging the lies of Syrians and her fellow high school students. Her presentation tonight will focus on the opioid crisis.
Good evening. First of all, thank you all for coming out tonight. My name is Madison McAllister. I'm an 18-year-old college student at Massasoit Community College in Brockton, Massachusetts.
Your mic is not working.
No, that's just a video mic.
Speak louder, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
It might be better if you stand.
Maybe move the chair.
You think so?
up and do something to get closer to it.
Okay. I think it's very important that we are coming together tonight to talk about solutions to fix our country's political climate. Political dissidence is at an all-time high, more so than ever. Young people are questioning the system of capitalism, especially after the 2016 elections, where one of the most popular candidates ran as a democratic socialist. Bernie Sanders is one of the most popular politicians in the US, and that's no coincidence that young people love him so much. We can and must work together to come up with solutions for what we can do in order to save our country from those who have been in power for too long. Neither Democrat or Republican represent our interests. A man named Huey Long once said back in 1932, they've got a set of Republican waiters on one side and a set of Democratic waiters on the other side. But no matter which set of waiters brings you the dish, the legislative grub is always prepared in the same Wall Street kitchen. This quote still stands true to this day. We are having these discussions because the future is in our hands and it's our duty to take back what is ours. We are the ones who create the profit, and we are the workers that make societies function. And we do not deserve to eat off the crumbs off the plates of the politicians, bankers, and 1% any longer. While the police state strangles our freedoms away, locks up 2 million people while shooting first and asking questions later, the richest country in the world suffers from extreme poverty. And I'm sure when you leave this building tonight, you'll see that. Our education and healthcare systems are privatized and fundings are cut. Only the ones with wealth are able to comfortably get the basic human needs that everyone needs. We spend trillions on war overseas while destabilizing the rest of the world. And tonight I want to talk to you about an American health epidemic. We see it every day when we walk down the streets. It's plaguing our communities and killing our fellow working class brothers and sisters. My own town has been hit hard by this crisis. I come from a suburban town outside of Boston, a small town where everyone knows everyone. Bristol County was one of the hardest counties hit in Massachusetts between January 2013 and September 2015. From early 2013 to late 2015, Mansfield police received 58 calls related to opiate overdoses. 23 of those cases, the opiate was heroin. So most of these deaths are related from your prescription pill cabinets. I recall talking to my old English teacher about how I wanted to give this speech. He told me he had been to multiple funerals for past students in the span of the last 5 years related from opioid overdoses, some of which were star athletes at one point in my school. We see people getting started with prescription painkillers, people getting hooked on pills that are supposed to treat your health, not make it worse. They end up exceeding their habit from $200 to $300 per day. So they shift to something cheaper, street drugs such as heroin. I've had friends' parents pass away from this crisis. Most of the time, someone will get hurt on the job. Doctors will prescribe them pain meds. In a matter of weeks, you're hooked. Without them, you can't seem to function normally. And in the end, people's lives are taken away from them. And I can also recall having a friend's mother of mine had become a victim of the war on drugs and was facing jail time while still addicted. She had been withdrawing her first week while incarcerated, asked for help from the prison staff multiple times, but ended up passing away from a seizure in her bunk. Time and time again, we know that jail time does not fix addictions for addicts. They come out and the first thing on their mind is still their addiction. We should be funding rehabilitation centers for everyone, not just those who can afford luxury rehab facilities in California to get treatment. And I would like to remind you that this drug epidemic is nothing new. Our country has been addicted for decades now. In the 1960s, heroin and other drugs were just as much of a problem as they are now. Veterans from the Vietnam War would come home still addicted from using heroin to numb their pain while in combat. During the year 1969 in New York alone, there were over 900 deaths resulting from drug addiction. Out of these, 210 were youth ranging from 12 to 19. These numbers have grown into the thousands. While the war on drugs rages on, the drug epidemic does not seem to be put to a stop. And the industrial prison complex only has grown larger. The opioid crisis kills on average 115 Americans a day from overdoses. Official government studies estimate over 700,000 deaths since 1999, and many others that go undocumented. U.S. opioid use is the highest in any country in the world, more than 50% higher than Germany, which comes in second. 95% of the world's opioids are consumed here in the States. Life expectancy has even declined in the United States for 2 years in a row, fueled by increasing death rates from the opioid drug overdoses. U.S. life expectancy from 78.7 in 2015 to 78.6 in 2016, compared to Cuba, which has a life expectancy rate of 79.9 and continues to grow. And as other countries' mortality rates are decreasing, America's is increasing. We are losing generations of young Americans to this crisis. How come as technology and medical advancements are being made, quality of life declines here? It's because in a capitalist society, we put profit over bettering society as a collective as a whole. And does anyone know where most of the world's opium comes from?
Afghanistan.
Yep. As heroin use grows in the United States, poppy crops thrive in Afghanistan, the same country we have been occupying for almost my entire lifespan. And the coincidence, there's no coincidence in that. In 2014, opioids were involved in 28,647 deaths. 61% of those overdoses were overdose deaths from opioids. That rate has tripled since 2000, and the numbers are increasing in alarming rates. In 2017, the number increased to 49,000. Opioids are more deadly than firearms and car crashes in the States. The increase in opioid addiction is directly related to our labor force participation. People are no longer working because of this crisis. Numbers have fallen in areas where opioid pain medication is prescribed the most. An estimated 15% of construction workers suffer from substance abuse, and the escalating cost of Suboxone, which is a drug that helps you get off of opioids, but is just as addicting, and other forms of narcotic addiction treatment threaten to bankrupt the health plans of several building unions. The numbers prescribed of opioids in this country would be able to give every man, woman, and child in this country a 30-day supply. The workforce in the United States is addicted. This epidemic has become so overwhelming that funeral directors all across America are asking for something to be done because of how many coffins of people are coming in from opioid overdoses. Over the past decade, out-of-state drug companies shipped 20.8 million prescription painkillers to 2 pharmacies 4 blocks away from each other. And this occurred in the town of southern West Virginia with a population of only 2,900 people. Massive shipments of hydrocodone and oxycodone, 2 powerful painkillers, came to the town of Williamson. And this is happening to thousands of towns all across the United States, including my own. The biggest drug dealers in our country are the pharmaceutical companies, and they deserve to serve time just like anyone else that has become a victim to the war on drugs. Now, when it comes to the Justice Department and DEA, they don't blame economic issues on this crisis. Instead, I read an article yesterday that the title was, Justice Department claims that emo rap is responsible for the opioid crisis, which is a scapegoat just as ridiculous as saying rock and roll is the devil 60 to 50 years ago. The problem is rooted in economic inequality. Over 2 decades, the increase in numbers of opioid deaths were neglected by each political parties. Doctors and hospital directors were either actively complicit or in denial. However, the FDA continued to approve manufacturing and promoting prescriptively habit-forming narcotics and sedatives to millions of American patients, well, without the warning of possible side effects. Big Pharma earns billions in profits despite the devastation. Between 1999 and 2014, pharmaceutical makers were earning $10 billion each year in profits from the sale of distribution of opiates. Nowadays, we acknowledge that the opioid crisis is a problem, but the solutions come up short. People are not looking at the bigger issue. A lot of imprisonment, high-priced personal addiction treatment centers, volunteer support groups, aid courses, just say no campaigns. However, as a socialist, I say we need to be educating victims regarding the socioeconomic trends and those who own the pharmaceutical companies that blasted their communities and poisoned Americans with addiction and eventually death. Multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies manufacture and market narcotics and extremely habit-forming sedatives. Their companies manipulate the health professions and lobby among the politicians for a pain-free America. The producer of leading business gateway into addiction, oxycodone, is Purdue. The corporation was based and run entirely by the Slacker family. They started producing laxatives and earwax and introducing extremely habit-forming tranquilizers to finally manufacturing and pushing the foremost profitable prescription medicine in history, oxycodone. Within the 1990s, throughout President Bill Clinton's healthcare reform, many pharmaceutical firms began to sharply selling opioids to treat chronic but not acute pain, claiming they carried very little risk to addiction. The foremost distributor of those drug companies was Purdue, among many others. The Slacker family's web value rose to over $14 billion, according to Forbes billionaires list, whereas Purdue prescribed drugs reaped over $35 billion in exploit to sell oxycodone. Following Slacker's example, alternative drug company billionaires joined the slaughter, and deaths and mayhem increased. Opioid pain medication was thus low cost to supply and had created its own ever-expanding demand as teenagers raid grandmothers' pill cabinets in search of narcotics, and poor staff lined up at pill mills. Oxycodone and its siblings made the best ratio in the pharmaceutical history. The president and Congress, Democrats and Republicans, unnoticed this epidemic, and as a result, they were bought off by their campaign donors at Big Pharma. Over the past 20 years, the political elite received millions in campaign funds from massive pharmaceutical company lobbies, together with politicians from states ravaged by prescription narcotics. The prescription narcotic and succeeding illegal narcotic addiction epidemic has become a $1 million business. Now, if government-funded rehabilitation centers or self-help like rehabs that cost the thousands of dollars that not every working class person can afford, what is the solution? I'd say socialism. The link between capitalism and drug reaches back to the center of the 19th century, when the British Empire forced opioid crops from their South Asian colonies into the Chinese market, making large demand and a population that became addicted. The famous Opium War in 1839 forced China to accept opium brought on English ships. Malcolm X once wrote, "Imagine, declare war upon someone who objects to be narcoticized." The Chinese government that had prohibited the use and sale of narcotics was afraid of growing social chaos created by mass addiction and visited war from the Western powers to halt the flood of medication. Their defeat at the hands of land and their Chinese drug allies opened China to a large exploitation and pillage for a century. Chinese narcotic addicts were an obstacle to organizing national resistance. Its imperial protectors reworked China into the history's poorest country till an earth-shattering revolution stone broke the chains of addiction. Within the 21st century, the same method of decay has been occurring internally within the United States. The prescription opioid epidemic is ravaging families, neighborhoods, communities, cities, and states, particularly in working-class communities, and now has overflowed into the suburban towns and many mining and former producing Rust Belt regions. Many thousands of largely working class victims have died and have been left addicted to opioids. Unable to resist the destruction of their futures and have replaced a once powerful working class America. The addiction crisis is a class war waged on by those who profit off of it. Those who suffer are the ones who give everything to feed their addiction. The real, if not expressed, consequences of their trade has been to cull the population, render by the elite economic and political sections of our society, and destroy the capability of their victims. Members of the family, neighbors, and friends don't know that organizing and unify to fight back the slaughter of their communities. How did China fix the opioid problem? The Chinese Revolution of 1949 took charge in prosecuting and punishment of the warlord-controlled substance entrepreneurs. Addicts were restored and came back to their communities and planned to create a new society. The Communist Party of China, when it first took power, served the people for the first time, not the oppressors. It was possible for the people to organize in their own interests to solve those problems. For months after the revolution, the Mass Lion campaign took on drug addiction. This campaign did not rely on social workers talking down to people or on punishments of jail time. It wasn't about buying your way through drug rehabilitation. It was not about individual solutions through one-on-one therapy. It's not about filling prisons with addicts while allowing the capitalist class to get rich off the drug trade. It was about real solutions. It was about stopping the terrible addiction to slavery to addiction to drugs, and stopping the drug trade that profited off people's suffering. And lots of other oppression was wiped out too. After the revolution, China got rid of prostitution, brutal poverty, illiteracy, unemployment, domestic violence, crime, police brutality, and so on. The revolution completely changed people's lives, and it led to do things that were unthinkable only a couple of years before. Likewise, in the 1959 revolution in Cuba, drug dens and brothels were cracked down by the revolutionary leadership. The primary step in an effective cure to this crisis would need an organization of mass movements dedicated to anti-drug lawyers, physicians, medical personnel, and community organizers, community leaders, and a real concern about national wellness. Not a mouthpiece for company elite. Increased kid and maternal mortality and deaths are preventable if we put our minds to it. We need a planned government and economy that puts our needs first before profit. How much longer are the American people going to let the ruling class of this country kill our country and the rest of the world? I think it's time that we take back what is ours and start planning our futures together.